Masha, I thought what you were saying about translating the title of Animal Farm was actually really interesting. I just wanted to know, this is quite a sort of pedestrian question really, but the actual process of going through the whole work and translating it, what sort of other problems did you encounter, and how did you approach the work? I mean, did you have a particular philosophy in doing so? And secondly, how was your translation received in Russia?
Thank you very much for this question. I'll tell you briefly that of course it was great fun on the one hand, because lots of things are taken were taken by Orwell from the Soviet life. For example, when one of the hens says to another, under the guidance of our great leader, I managed to have 5 eggs in 6 days. You know, this is a direct quote from the Soviet 5-year plans or 5-day plans and all that. So this was fun. Also, it was great fun to do anthems. You know, about Napoleon, firm and commanding eye, you know, all these things, because this obviously takes the Soviet style, and it was just bringing it back. I recognized lots of Soviet stuff there, like the Napoleon was the best friend of the ducklings. That actually was something very much from the Soviet speak. The difficulty was that Orwell's prose is unique in its lucidity and simplicity. And Animal Farm, because I think he even mentions it in his preface to the Ukrainian edition, that he specifically wrote it in such a way that it would be easy to translate it into different languages. And because he was a great writer, and it was art, what he was doing, he really wrote it just so transparently, so clearly. And it is more difficult to render this into a different language, especially into the language like Russian, with lots of clauses and commas and you know, things like that, than to do more complicated stuff, than to do metaphors, for example. I mean, it's easy to translate images, but it's much more difficult to translate this lucid, simple, direct and wonderful prose. So that was the problem, of course.
Can I ask also, you said when the books were first published after Perestroika, they were sort of, everybody wanted to read them, but how did everybody know about Orwell and Russia?
Well, because in Russia there's always been in the I mean, when we say everybody, we are mostly talking about intelligentsia, people who read things, students. It doesn't mean that 240 million or whatever there were people in the Soviet Union, but everybody who read things had this incredible thirst for books, arts, everything that was. Because forbidden fruit is sweet. If you are not allowed to read something, obviously you develop such enormous interest in it that people actually, when we were reading it, 1984, at the beginning of the 80s, it was, you still could get into prison for reading it, just for possessing the book. And I remember, especially because of this sort of book, when you keep it at home, or, I don't know, you take it to your friend or from your friend, you have this awful fear. What if they stop me? Or what if they come? And it is lying on the kitchen table. Of course you would wrap it up. You would not just carry along a foreign edition. But what if they see it? And even though it was so much related to danger, connected to danger, and you were threatened by all these fears, still you really wanted to get it, because you knew you were missing something. And it wasn't only with Orwell, but it was just with any foreign film, which you didn't get. You had this feeling that you're deprived of it. And that's why people made extraordinary efforts. They would type it, just retype it for their friends to read. Not only Orwell, and a friend has typed for me at the beginning of, just before Perestroika, the book of Evgenia Ginsburg, which is called in English Whirlwind or something like that. Yeah, yeah. It's in Russian it's Крутой маршрут, and in English it's
Into the Whirlwind.
Into the Whirlwind. It's a huge book. He just typed it, 4 copies you could only do on the typewriter. Yes, and just for his friends to read it, because he was so impressed, because that was her story about Gulag. So that's how people knew.
There was quite a lot of, I mean, there's lots of stuff translated, obviously, and what we would call in the Soviet period, what would be called progressive, I suppose. I mean, people like John Dos Passos, Hemingway was translated a lot. And I remember when I was, soon after I got to Russia, I was in Perm doing something, writing something, and I'd been to visit a factory before, and my Russian was very bad, but I'd managed to convey a kind of dissatisfaction that, like in almost every other country outside the UK, people refer to the inhabitants of this country as English. And I said, amiably enough, I think, that I was not Angli-Chan, I was Shetlanders. And for some, that was a right thing to say, because the people who were in the factory were, Soviet men and women, and they regarded the Scots as it were more progressive than the English, something shared by the Scots themselves. But in the evening, when I was in my luxurious and tourist hotel, one of the people who I'd been talking to came to me, bringing a bottle of vodka, and I don't know if it's still published, tiny little book, a book about this size, which were published in blue covers and they were poetry books. They had verses, very often not the whole poem, but 2 or 3 verses. And this one was Burns. And this guy who spoke English very well, actually, said, you know this famous song of Robert Burns, which goes, when somebody meets somebody else walking about the field. I said, I don't know that one. It was when a buddy meets a buddy coming through the rye. It's been translated by the great Russian translator Masha, I think, who translated Shakespeare.
Yeah, yeah.
And this was how this man was then
back translating
when somebody meets somebody else walking about the fields. I think, well, Masha, you'll know much more about this than I mean, my friend Arkady Ostrovsky, who's now the economist correspondent in Moscow, wrote a thesis about this, about how Shakespeare was done in Stalin's time, and it was translated, of course, and put on. But because these were optimistic times, and things had to, things were always things can only get better, to paraphrase New Labour. They gave Hamlet a happy ending. Across. And Macbeth, I think, also had a happy ending. King Lear possibly defeated him, but I mean, it was well.